May 8, 1942. Coral Sea, South Pacific. The ocean burned. Smoke rolled over the waves in thick black sheets as the USS Yorktown limped away from the battlefield. Her decks were scarred and twisted, her hangar a mess of charred steel and firefighting foam. The stench of fuel and burnt paint hung heavy in the tropical air. On the bridge, Captain Elliot Buckmaster wiped sweat from his brow and looked out at the horizon where the last flames of the Battle of the Coral Sea flickered. The American task force had stopped the Japanese advance toward Port Moresby, but at a terrible cost. The carrier Lexington was gone. Yorktown, too, looked doomed. "Damage report," Buckmaster ordered. Commander Clarence E. Aldrich, his engineering officer, flipped through the oil-stained sheets. "We've taken one direct hit and multiple near misses. Bomb through the flight deck, explosions below. Boilers out, frames buckled, 3 compartments flooded." He hesitated. "She shouldn't even be afloat, sir." The Yorktown shuddered under his feet, a hollow groan echoing through her hull as the pumps struggled to keep up with the flooding. Below decks, damage control parties fought to contain fires and reinforce bulkheads with steel beams scavenged from wreckage. The air was thick with sweat and desperation. "Get us home," Buckmaster said quietly. "Whatever's left of her, we'll get it home." For 3 days, the crippled carrier crawled toward Pearl Harbor, her crew working around the clock. Engineers patched holes with planks and canvas. Divers braved flooded compartments to weld temporary seals. The ship's boilers, 2 of them crippled, were coaxed back to life with prayers and profanity. When she finally reached Pearl Harbor on May 27th, she was barely recognizable, smoke-blackened, listing, and limping. Navy yards were already filled with other damaged ships from earlier battles. No one believed Yorktown could return to combat anytime soon. One officer at the dockyard looked her over and muttered, "She'll need 3 months, minimum." But 3 months was a luxury America didn't have. Intelligence from the crypt analysts at Station HIPO had revealed Japan's next move, an attack on Midway. And the strike was coming within days. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, received the damage reports and stared at the charts spread across his desk. He needed every ship he could muster, and fast. The Japanese were bringing 4 carriers. America had only 2 ready, Enterprise and Hornet. Without Yorktown, Midway would fall. Nimitz didn't hesitate. "Get her ready," he said. "I don't care if she's held together by chewing gum and prayer. I want Yorktown in that fight." At Pearl Harbor's dry dock, the order hit the shipyard like a shockwave. The workers, welders, engineers, riggers, electricians, stared at the wreck of the Yorktown and then at the calendar. 3 months' worth of work, 3 days to do it. And so began one of the most impossible repair jobs in naval history. The clock started ticking. May 28, 1942, Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. The sun had barely risen when the first sparks flew. The Yorktown sat in dry dock number 1 like a wounded giant, her hull still streaked with oil and soot. Around her, hundreds of men swarmed, welders in heavy aprons, pipe fitters crawling into tight spaces, and divers preparing to descend beneath the hull. Chief Engineer Jack Mac McDonnell barked orders from a catwalk overlooking the chaos. "No breaks! No sleep till she floats!" he shouted, voice raw from exhaustion. The workers didn't argue. They all knew the stakes. Word had already spread through the dockyard. The Japanese were coming for Midway. If Yorktown didn't sail, Hawaii could be next. Teams worked in 12-hour rotations, though most refused to stop. Welders patched hull plates day and night, their torches lighting the docks like a constellation of man-made stars. In the engine rooms, Mechanics replaced damaged turbines and scavenged working parts from other vessels. The heat was suffocating, the noise relentless. The rhythmic clang of hammers, the hiss of steam, the blare of generators echoing through the dry dock. Every man knew time was running out. By the second day, over 400 shipyard workers had joined the effort. They sealed ruptured bulkheads, rewired the shattered communications lines, and rebuilt torn sections of the flight deck with fresh planks of Douglas fir shipped in from the mainland. Oilers refueled the ship, even as welders worked inches away, the smell of burning metal mixing with the scent of diesel. It wasn't just workers. Yorktown's crew pitched in too. Sailors scrubbed soot from the hangars, riggers stitched torn arrestor cables, and pilots hauled ammunition crates up to the flight deck. Captain Buckmaster walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement. He could see the fatigue etched in their faces, red-eyed, soot-covered, hands blistered. But not one man complained. At night, floodlights illuminated the shipyard, and the entire harbor seemed to glow. Nearby, Enterprise and Hornet floated at anchor, ready to sail. But their sister ship, the wounded Yorktown, was still in pieces. Admiral Nimitz visited the yard in person, stepping onto the catwalk to look down at the progress. His usually calm face was lined with strain. "How long until she's seaworthy?" he asked. The dockmaster hesitated. "We're working round the clock, sir. But 3 days, maybe less." Nimitz nodded slowly. "Then you've got 72 hours, not a minute more." And somehow, impossibly, they made it happen. By the morning of June 1st, the Yorktown's hull had been sealed, her power restored, and her flight deck reinforced. The dock workers, too tired to cheer, simply leaned against railings as the pumps filled the dry dock with seawater. Slowly, the carrier began to rise. Her once gutted hangar now echoed with the hum of power. Her radar masts turned skyward again. One welder wiped sweat from his brow and muttered to a shipmate, "She shouldn't be floating, mate." His friend grinned weakly. "Aye, but she is." When the Yorktown slipped free from the dock that afternoon, the workers lined the rails in silence. Many didn't realize they'd just performed a miracle. The shipyard clock read 72 hours exactly. As the carrier steamed out of Pearl Harbor, her paint still scorched and scaffolding ropes trailing in the wind, the men who built her back waved her off like a ghost returning to battle. On the horizon, her escorts were already waiting. Enterprise and Hornet, their decks loaded with bombers and fighters. Below deck, the smell of new steel mixed with salt air. The men aboard Yorktown were bone-tired but proud. One petty officer leaned against a bulkhead and whispered to his friend, "We were dead in the water last week. Now look at us." His shipmate nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, let's go show the Japs what a 72-hour job can do." The Yorktown was bruised, battered, but alive, and heading straight for destiny. June 4th, 1942. Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. The morning sky was clear and cold, too calm for what was about to happen. From the deck of the USS Yorktown, air crews moved with quiet precision, their boots clanging against the steel as armorers loaded bombs under the stubby wings of Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers. The smell of aviation fuel and salt air mixed into a sharp, electric scent. The smell of battle. "Pilots to your stations," crackled the loudspeaker. "Enemy force sighted northwest, bearing 320, distance 150 miles. Below decks, sailors tightened the last bolts on patched bulkheads. The ship creaked and hummed, tired but ready. Captain Elliot Buckmaster stood on the bridge, peering through his binoculars toward the horizon. He knew the odds. 4 Japanese carriers were out there: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, veterans of Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea. Against them, the Americans had only 3: Enterprise, Hornet, and his half-healed Yorktown. But the Japanese didn't know she was here. They believed Yorktown had gone down weeks ago. "Signal the task force," Buckmaster ordered calmly. "We'll take the first launch." At 0900 hours, the first Dauntlesses screamed into the sky, their engines roaring across the ocean. Below, sailors cheered, waving their caps as the planes vanished into the blue. The ship vibrated with life again, a heartbeat reborn. Miles away, aboard the Japanese carrier Akagi, flight crews prepared for what they thought would be an easy victory. Their reconnaissance reports had counted only 2 American carriers. When radar suddenly picked up aircraft coming from a third direction, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo frowned. "Impossible," he said, turning to his staff. The Yorktown was sunk at Coral Sea. But as lookouts confirmed another full strike group closing in, the color drained from his face. "Then the Americans," he murmured, "have raised the dead." At 10:20 hours, the first American bombs fell. From 20,000 feet, the Dauntlesses dove like hawks, one after another, their sirens howling as they cut through the sky. Bombs struck the Japanese decks with thunderclaps. In a matter of minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were engulfed in flames. The pride of the Imperial Navy reduced to burning hulks. But victory came at a cost. At 11:45, Japanese bombers, the survivors from Hiryu, found the Yorktown. Lookouts shouted warnings as black specks appeared high above the sun. "Raiders inbound, 60 degrees high, dive bombers!" The ship's anti-aircraft guns erupted. The air filled with smoke and tracer fire, the gunners firing until their barrels glowed red. Then, impact. A 250-kilogram bomb slammed into the flight deck, tearing through 2 levels before exploding. Fire roared through the hangar bay, engulfing planes and fuel lines. The blast threw men off their feet, filling the corridors with choking smoke. "Damage control teams to stations," Buckmaster shouted, gripping the rail as the deck tilted under his boots. "Keep her alive." The men fought with everything they had: sealing hatches, flooding magazines to prevent explosions, and dragging the wounded from the inferno. They'd done this before at Coral Sea, and they knew the drill. But this time, the stakes were higher. Every minute Yorktown stayed afloat was another minute her pilots could fight. Within an hour, the flames were out. The ship still floated, battered, listing, but fighting. Smoke rose from her deck like a ghostly banner. From the bridge of Hiryu, Japanese spotters stared in disbelief. One officer pointed at the periscope viewfinder and said, "That carrier, it cannot be the same. The Americans must have another." Nagumo shook his head. "No, it's her. The Yorktown. The one we sank." Even as he spoke, a second wave of Japanese bombers formed up, desperate to finish the job. They came in low, their torpedoes skimming the waves. Yorktown's gunners fired until their guns jammed. 2 torpedoes struck home, tearing holes below the waterline. The ship groaned, tilted, and finally slowed to a stop. Captain Buckmaster looked out over the flames and said quietly, "Abandon ship." Men leapt into the sea, oil slicks burning around them. Destroyers rushed in to pick up survivors, circling the dying carrier. For a moment, the Pacific was filled with the shouts of men and the hiss of fire. But even as Yorktown settled lower in the water, the battle raged on, and her aircraft, launched hours earlier, struck the final blow. By sunset, all 4 Japanese carriers lay burning. The miracle ship had done her part. June 6, 1942, Midway Atoll, Pacific Ocean. The sea was calm again, deceptively so. All around, the wreckage of war drifted. Blackened planks, twisted girders, life vests, and oil spreading across the endless blue. Somewhere beneath that slick horizon, the Yorktown still floated. Barely. For 2 days, she refused to die. After the crew abandoned ship, salvage parties returned to her side. Tugboats and destroyers circled the crippled carrier as engineers from the Hammond tried to keep her alive. They patched holes, pumped out seawater, and strung thick tow cables to drag her toward safety. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Commander Clarence Aldrich, the same man who had once declared her beyond repair at Coral Sea, stood ankle-deep in water, hands on his hips, staring at the empty sky. "She won't quit," he said softly. "Not until we do." From the bridge of the nearby destroyer Balch, Captain Buckmaster watched the work unfold through binoculars. He'd left his ship reluctantly, forced by orders to stand down for his own safety. Now he watched as damage crews, the same men who'd welded her back together in 72 hours, fought to save her again, this time in the open ocean. At sunset, it seemed they might succeed. The Yorktown floated low, but steady. Pumps kept her dry, and the tow line held firm. Sailors began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the miracle could happen twice. Then, just before noon on June 6th, the sea betrayed her. A sharp lookout aboard the Hammond shouted, "Torpedo wake, starboard side." A Japanese submarine, I-168, had slipped through the destroyer's screen, stalking the rescue operation. 4 torpedoes shot through the waves. 1 missed. 2 slammed into Yorktown's side. The 4th struck the Hammond amidships, splitting her in half. The explosion was catastrophic. Men were thrown into the air, steel twisting and shrieking. In seconds, the Hammond was gone, sinking beneath the waves. But Yorktown still floated. She listed harder to port now, her decks awash, her great island leaning at an impossible angle. And still, incredibly, she held together. For another full day, she drifted, refusing to break. The men who'd served her stood on the destroyer decks nearby, hats in their hands, watching in silence. "She's not a ship," one sailor murmured. "She's a spirit." By dawn on June 7th, the ocean had made its claim. The Yorktown rolled slowly, gracefully, as if bowing one last time to her crew. Her stern rose into the air, the white letters CV5 still shining against the black hull. And then she slipped beneath the waves. The men watched her disappear, the sea swallowing the sound, until there was nothing left but the faint hiss of foam. Buckmaster lowered his head. "She gave everything," he said quietly. "And she gave us Midway." In Tokyo, the news struck like a thunderclap. 4 of Japan's frontline carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, destroyed. Hundreds of their best pilots gone. The Empire's naval supremacy shattered in a single day. At Naval General Headquarters, an officer reading the intelligence reports shook his head in disbelief. "The Americans sent 3 carriers? We sank 1 at Coral Sea." Another officer, a veteran of the Pearl Harbor strike, said bitterly, "They must have built a new one." He was wrong. They hadn't built a New Yorktown. They'd rebuilt the same one in 3 days. At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz received the victory report and sat silently for a long time. Then he reached for his logbook and wrote only 2 words: Yorktown avenged. For the men who had welded her back together, for the sailors who fought her fires and manned her guns, and for the pilots who flew from her deck. It was vindication. Their impossible effort had bought time, bought hope, and ultimately, bought victory. Weeks later, the shipyard at Pearl Harbor received a package, a dented brass plate salvaged from Yorktown's bridge before she went under. Engraved into the metal were the words, "To the men who made her ready, she fought as hard as you worked." It was mounted on the wall of the repair docks, where new carriers now rose from the scaffolds: Essex, Bunker Hill, Intrepid. The war would go on, but the legacy of that one ship and those 72 hours of sweat and fire would echo through every rivet driven after her. The Japanese had thought Yorktown was finished. They thought America would take months to recover. Instead, in just 3 days, a crippled carrier returned from the dead and turned the tide of the Pacific War. The miracle at Midway wasn't just fought by pilots or admirals. It was forged by hands that refused to stop working.